Dragons. Across the whole of fantasy and mythology, few creatures are as iconic or powerful as the mighty dragons. And in D&D, no creature short of the gods are. Be they the goodly metallics or the sinister Lenorms, the enigmatic gem dragons or their lesser cousins such as wyverns, dragons evoke an instant sense of recognition among players when they are mentioned in D&D, or just about any other tabletop game. However, in D&D, no type of dragon is as immediately recognizable as the evil chromatic dragons. Whether it is the savage and bestial white dragon laying waste to its foes with its breath of cold, the cruel and sadistic black dragon taking pleasure in the pain and torment of its enemies, the cunning and manipulative green dragon using its guile and wit to manipulate lesser beings into doing its bidding, or the most recognizable of them all, the prideful and authoritarian red dragons, who use their strength and power to feed their mighty avarice. The chances are that you as a GM have, or will at some point, have your players encounter one of these mighty creatures. However, there is a fifth chromatic dragon among this group that needs to be touched upon. The dragon that I wish to touch on today in this very first episode of the Bestiary. Striking in its appearance and rich with interesting character potential, no list of chromatic dragons would be complete without these mighty Stormbringers. I speak, of course, of the powerful blue dragons. Now before we continue on, a small note on what this new series, the Bestiary, is. A spin-off of So You Want to Be a GM, the Bestiary is going to cover different creatures from across the various tabletop games I've played, not just Dungeons & Dragons, that I find to be particularly interesting and fun to play. Now, dragons, of course, are going to be at the top of this list because who doesn't enjoy playing as the dragons when you're running a game? Dragons are great and powerful. They are the mightiest creatures that you can face much of the time, and as such, they hold a place of special importance across tabletop gaming. And because of that, I am going to touch on each of the chromatic dragons in time, not just the blue dragons. And through this series, we're going to see different ways in which you can play these creatures as characters, different ways you can set up encounters for them, things for you as a GM to consider to make these encounters more exciting, greater in depth both mechanically and roleplay-wise, and just generally more memorable as a whole for yourself and for your players. So without any further ado, let's begin by digging into the mighty blue dragons.
I am small. I kill where I wish. I am strong, strong, strong.
We'll begin our examination by taking a look first at the physical description and personality traits that are common to blue dragons. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in my personal opinion, the blue dragons are the most striking of the chromatic dragons in terms of their appearance. And this is because, in many ways, the blue dragons are the most unique looking of the chromatic dragons, except for maybe the black dragons with their almost skeletal face. However, where all the other chromatic dragons, black dragons included, have traits that are immediately recognizable as traditional dragon traits, often sporting large crests and pairs of horns on their heads, or mixes of both, as is the case with the red dragons, blue dragons feature a look that is a little more prehistoric in its nature, with their deep-set eyes and crocodilian jaws, as well as the large singular horn that juts out of the middle of their head. The visage of a blue dragon is more akin to that of an undersea dinosaur of some type. Savage and bestial, something that might actually be more fitting for the genuinely savage and bestial white dragons. Their bodies are large and muscular, and their feet and tails are actually quite wide, unusually so for dragons. This is because blue dragons have a tendency to make their homes in places with soft ground like deserts or sandy beaches, though they do not shy away from mountains either. Indeed, the large feet and tail are very helpful to the blue dragons, for while it prefers to fight in the air, it lairs underground, using its large, heavy tail, wide feet, and large claws to facilitate burrowing into the earth to create the massive caverns it prefers to lair in. Equally striking is its coloration. While the underside tends to be a sandy beige, its remaining scales can range in hue from deep blue to indigo in color. And among the more ancient members of this species, the scales can be heard humming and seen sparking with brilliant lightning. But easily the most striking and recognizable feature of the blue dragon is its ears. Large and frilled things, they tend to resemble fins more than actual ears, but be not mistaken, those are in fact the dragon's ears. And although these do make it appear as something more of an aquatic creature, as I mentioned earlier, don't be mistaken. The blue dragon is not aquatic. It prefers to live underground, not under the sea. Even more striking than the dragon's appearance, however, is its personality. Blue dragons are incredibly prideful creatures, the most prideful of all the dragons, even more so than reds. However, they tend to lack the cruelty of the black dragons, as well as the limitless ambition of red and green dragons. This means that, compared to the other chromatic dragons, blue dragons tend to be a little bit more reserved, a rather unique trait among chromatics. What they lack in ambition, however, they more than make up for in their fierce territoriality. Blue dragons are by far the most territorial of all the chromatic dragons, rarely willing to give any intruder who enters their territory, even accidentally, the opportunity to explain themselves. Indeed, the only other way to anger a blue dragon faster than entering its territory is to insult its pride. Specifically, blue dragons despise any insinuation that they may be weak, and will most assuredly react with rage and lethality towards anyone who attempts to do so. That being said, blue dragons are not wholly unreasonable creatures. In fact, when given due respect regarding its territory and its pride, blue dragons make surprisingly peaceful neighbors, especially when compared to their other chromatic cousins. And it's this aspect of their personality in particular that makes them such a wonderful choice for game masters. Because of this particular behavior, blue dragons are a little more willing than the other chromatics to hear out the players when they enter their territory, even if such a thing is rare. This, therefore, gives game masters and players alike the opportunity to have a roleplay encounter with the dragon as opposed to a straight combat encounter, something that often and quite disappointingly doesn't really get utilized for these highly intelligent creatures. This also means that there is the possibility that they have lesser creatures under their employ, similar to how green and red dragons might. Because of this, the GM is able to sort of set up the encounter with the blue dragon before the blue dragon is ever actually encountered. By sending out the blue dragon's lesser minions to encounter the players, whether violently or non-violently, the GM can build up to the inevitable encounter with the dragon itself, leading into an epic roleplay encounter or a great epic battle, whichever seems more appropriate for your group. And those lesser creatures need not be creatures other than dragons. In fact, those lesser creatures can actually be other blue dragons. And this is because of something that is very unique to the blues, a hierarchical society. While this is specifically noted in some of the Forgotten Realms materials, blue dragons having a hierarchical society that is unique to their species sets up a lot of possibilities for unique roleplay opportunities for not only you as the GM, but your players as well, dependent on how this hierarchy is set. Now, the most common and obvious way for this hierarchy to be set is based on the strength, age, and power of the different dragons, with the oldest and strongest sitting at the top, and the youngest and weakest at the bottom, and everyone else in between. However, one could play with the idea of a younger dragon attempting to usurp an older one by destroying them and taking them out, or at the very least, proving themselves weaker by comparison by beating them in a test of combat or test of wits. Honestly, the mere presence of this hierarchy alone, something that none of the other chromatic dragon types have, has the potential to provide enough material for me to make an entire video dedicated to just this aspect of blue dragons. And that's something I might actually do in the future. This aspect by itself just provides so much uniqueness to the blues that makes them stand out compared to all the other chromatic dragons that it is well worth touching on and well worth considering for yourself as a game master when trying to set up an encounter with a blue dragon for your players. But personality and physical appearance are not the only ways in which blue dragons differentiate themselves from the rest.
I did not believe them.
And do you now?
Truly. The tales and songs fall utterly short of your enormity, O Smaug, the stupendous.
When it comes to their lairs, blue dragons are often assumed to be dragons that prefer areas with soft earth that is easy to burrow in, and indeed it's easy to see why this is the case, as they are often depicted as either living near beaches or the coasts or in sandy deserts. The truth of the matter is that the softness of the earth has little to nothing to do with where the blue dragons lair. In fact, it has nothing to do with the earth at all, but rather what happens in the skies. And this has to do with the nickname that the blue dragons carry with them, storm dragons. You see, because of a blue dragon's affinity for lightning and storms, they love to live in areas that are frequently subject to violent storms. And most blue dragons won't feel at home if they're not living in some place where they can frequently hear the clap of thunder off in the distance. And there we have the real reason why blue dragons so frequently are depicted as living near coasts and in deserts, as these areas are frequently subject to more violent storms, even if the storms aren't necessarily always frequent. That being said, if a blue dragon cannot find some place to roost where there aren't violent storms that frequent the area, they can roost just about anywhere. From rocky mountain tops to fetid swamps to even the Underdark, a blue dragon will lair just about any place, with the exception being someplace that has a cold, almost Arctic-level climate. However, any blue dragon that lairs someplace where there aren't frequent storms is not going to be happy with where it's layering, and even if they remain there for hundreds or even a couple thousand years, they will consider that lair to be a temporary one until such time as they can find someplace suitably stormy enough to keep them happy. Beyond this, blue dragons prefer to lair in places that are high and difficult to reach. Gargantuan stone ruins or large caves at the tops of hills, cliffs, or mountains are much preferred choices among blues. They also appear to have a penchant for taking over the abandoned structures of lesser races as well. But wherever it is that they lair, blue dragons attempt to make these places as lofty as possible so that they can survey their territory from the heights. This is doubly true if they manage to lair in some place that does have the stormy weather that they appreciate, as this high elevation helps them to feel more one with the storms in the region. And even if they can't manage to create a lair in one of these high altitude places that they prefer, they will still attempt to create one that is difficult to enter and more likely only able to be safely entered through their own flight. Doing so offers blue dragons a natural form of protection for both their treasure hoards and their nests by forcing land-based creatures, such as adventurers, to undertake difficult, if not impossible, climbs to even attempt to access the lair in the first place. This also affords the blues easy access to their territory, as all they have to do to defend it or hunt in it is take to the skies, leaping out of their entrances to glide through the air and begin hunting or guarding any place that they consider theirs. However, this will not always be an option for the blues, and sometimes they will be required to leave their territory to hunt. In these instances, usually driven by a need to hunt when food is scarce, the blues prefer to do so as close to their territory as possible and hunt by ambush. This marks one of the rare instances in which the blues will actually take to the ground. There they will burrow, completely covering their bodies with the exception of their horn and the tip of their snout so that they can breathe. This will cause their horn to appear as a single jagged outcropping of rock, enabling the blues to blend in very nicely with their environment so that they can quickly ambush prey if they need to. More often, though, the blues prefer to stick to the skies, engaging in sweeping aerial strikes across their territory. In fact, it isn't uncommon for them to attempt to harass their enemies or their prey with a sweeping strike from the air, lashing out with a blast of lightning from their maw, and then swooping back into the sky only to return minutes or sometimes hours later to do so again. This can make living or traveling through the territory of an active blue dragon a very unpredictable and dangerous thing, as the players will then have little idea of when or where the dragon may strike. And once again, this also enables you as the GM to start building up to an inevitable encounter with the dragon at a later point, possibly in the dragon's lair itself. But what if the player does reach the dragon's lair? What should they find in there? Well, where treasures are concerned, blue dragons tend to prefer gems above all else, specifically, and appropriately, blue gems like sapphires. Gems for blues are the most precious of all treasures save for only one other thing, and that is their eggs. So if you're going to have your players encounter a female blue dragon, especially if she has a clutch, You'll need to consider how she's going to treat those eggs and her young. Fortunately, that is something that we also have a little bit of information on, and another way in which blue dragons are surprisingly unique compared to the other chromatics. For you see, despite their pride and their inherently evil nature, blue dragons make surprisingly good parents, protecting their young until they're at a point where they can defend themselves and being fiercely protective of their eggs. This is due in part to the fact that blue dragon eggs need to be carefully monitored so that they can hatch properly. They need to be buried inside of warm earth or sand in order to incubate and hatch correctly, and if they are disturbed, there is a great risk of the baby dying before it can even hatch. As such, blue dragons are fiercely protective of their nests, and would likely lash out against those who harm their young in a fashion similar to how they would lash out against those who might insult them by insinuating them weak. That being said, the one aspect that we do not know about when it comes to blue dragon parentage is whether these are single or two-parent households, so to speak. We do not know if male and female blues tend to roost together, as this information is not noted, but as far as I'm concerned, that just means that this is a free place for you to adapt the dragon as you wish. Perhaps it turns out that this dragon that your players have been encountering sweeping at them through the skies and attacking them as they approach the lair is not the female, but a male protecting its mate and its nest from without, and then returning to the nest when the player arrives to team up with the female to take them on in order to protect their young. Conversely, there is also the possibility that the players could discover a nest on their own inhabited by a solitary female dragon, possibly even an ancient female dragon, and that smaller dragons that they've been encountering throughout have been male consorts that she is tasked with protecting the territory while she incubates the eggs. These options and more all exist for you to experiment with when it comes to the dragons and their lairs. And all of these options can tie back once again to the hierarchy that exists within Blue Dragon society. Lastly, consider the difficulty that is required to reach a Blue Dragon's lair much of the time. Because they like to lair in places that would be difficult to reach by land, forcing difficult or often impossible climbs as was noted earlier, this creates a unique opportunity to have an encounter revolving around the terrain itself, once again building up this encounter with the dragon before the dragon even appears. Furthermore, consider if the dragon actually does manage to lair someplace where these heavy storms are present, as the weather could now also come into effect on top of the difficult terrain, making the challenge even more daunting for your players. Indeed, these aspects of the lair by itself all help to feed into the sense of power and might that should be felt when you are about to encounter something as mighty as a dragon. That being said, not all dragons are created equal. Not all blue dragons are created equal, and not all versions of the blue dragon are created equal.
Revenge! I will show you revenge!
In 5th edition D&D specifically, dragons have been powered down a little bit as compared to previous editions. This is particularly true when comparing to the 3rd and 3.5 editions of the game, where dragons, especially ancient dragons, were practically on the same level as gods in terms of their power. Now, this is not to say that dragons in 5th edition are slouches, because they're not. They are still among the most powerful creatures you're going to encounter in that game, especially ancient dragons, and as such are still going to be a tough creature to take down in a fight. But if you are playing 5th edition, and let's face it, if you're watching this video at the time of upload, you probably are. It's the most popular tabletop RPG out there right now. And you want to recapture some of that old sense of power they had in previous editions, then I highly recommend using the variant spellcasting rules provided in the Monster Manual on page 86 at the start of the Dragon section. This variant rules section gives you options to run dragons as spellcasters, allowing you to select appropriate level spells for them that they can then cast throughout the day a certain number of times at will without the use of any reagents, similarly to how dragons could cast spells in 3rd edition. Now, Now, they're not going to get as many spells as they did in 3rd edition, and the spells that they're going to get probably still aren't going to be as powerful, but with the overall lower power level 5th edition has in comparison to 3rd and 3.5 edition, this still makes for a nice option for recapturing some of that sense of power that the dragons had in the previous edition without making them so strong that the players are never going to be able to touch them. And just like that, friends and gamers, we have reached the end of our look into the Blue Dragons and our first episode of the Bestiary. What do you think about this new series so far, and what are your thoughts on the Blue Dragons, more importantly? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you'd like to see more, and make sure to follow me on social media through the links in the description box to get the most consistent notifications of when I upload new videos. And with all of that said and done, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it is my hope that you continue to roll high, roleplay well, and game on.